watching Lit Sports Online. We're talking mixed martial arts again. Got quite a few updates to provide you with today. One of the things we want to talk about first is a big-time blockbuster trade, Demetrius Johnson for Ben Askren. What do you think about this, Pat?
So I think this is really exciting for a few reasons. First off, I'm very excited to see Ben Askren in the UFC. He's been one of the hottest prospects outside of the organization for a long time. He's a top-level guy. He's an All-American wrestling standout in college. He's an Olympian. He's an undefeated champion in every organization he's ever been in outside of the UFC so far. And I think that he poses a ton of threats for the welterweight division and possibly outside of that division as well. And he's a very, very, very high-level grappler who really doesn't get hit in any of his fights. His style isn't like the most exciting. He's not a striker who's going to have a knockdown, drag-out fight, but he's such a good grappler, and he's so good at taking people down and controlling them that he barely ever gets hit. So it's a really exciting fight to see, or an exciting thing to see him come into the UFC and challenge some of the top guys in the UFC. We'll really see whether he is as good as we think he is. And I think it's also exciting for Mighty Mouse. I think that Demetrius Johnson had more title defenses than anyone in UFC history. He had 11 title defenses in the flyweight division. He cleaned out that division. The only person to beat him in his division was Henry Cejudo after he had already beaten Cejudo. So since Cejudo's been drumming up all this talk about him going up a weight class and fighting TJ Dillashaw, there's not much left for Mighty Mouse in the UFC. I think it's exciting to see him go overseas. He's been kind of vocal about not liking the promotion style in the UFC where people are trash talking a lot, and I think that him going to ONE FC, which has a more traditional look at the martial arts and how the athletes should behave, I think it's a good move, and I think he's going to make a ton of money over there. Eddie Alvarez recently went over there and is getting a ton of money, so I think for him it's a really good move. I also think it's really interesting to see two of the 3 or 4 biggest MMA organizations in the world making a trade, which has never been done before. We've never seen anything like this happen. The only time we've ever seen fighters from different organizations move around is when they either ran their contract out or another organization was bought, like the UFC bought Pride back in the day, the UFC bought Strikeforce. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this leads in the future.
But as far as the trade is concerned, do the fighters have to agree to go to the other organization, or are they just kind of forced to do it?
So I think what happened is that they both have the same agent. They both have the same representative or manager, and I think that this Malky Kawa is his name. I think he made the trade happen, and what happened is both organizations bought the contract of the other guy and are allowing them to renegotiate upon entry into their organization. So Ben Askren, they bought out the remaining fights on his contract with ONE FC, but they're allowing him to negotiate a new contract in the UFC, and the same with Mighty Mouse in ONE FC. So it's exciting. They'll both get to do something to their advantage, and both guys, I think, are right where they want to be at this stage in their career.
Interesting stuff. And then, of course, we also want to talk briefly about the Bellator heavyweight tournament.
Yeah. So since the last time we did an update on this, there have been 2 more fights rounding out the semifinals to make the final matchup. We had Chael Sonnen versus Fedor Emelianenko, which was a very highly anticipated fight, and it didn't disappoint. It was a short fight, but it was an exciting fight. We saw Chael make some decisions that people thought were questionable, but I didn't. I thought it was just a matter of it worked out for one guy better than it worked out for the other guy. Fedor caught Chael really early on in the fight, and then Chael tried to do a reversal off the back and ended up on his back instead, and Fedor landed some heavy ground and pound and TKO'd Chael in the first round. And the night before that, we had seen Ryan Bader take a unanimous decision win over Matt Mitrione, which is a guy that I was looking at going into the tournament as kind of the dark horse, is the one of the smaller guys in the tournament. He's a light heavyweight, and there's a lot of heavyweights in the tournament. It's for the heavyweight title. And Ryan Bader was able to grind out a decision over Matt Mitrione, setting up the fight for himself and Fedor, which is very exciting, I think, and particularly because we now have the light heavyweight champion fighting for the heavyweight title. So we're going to see the same thing in Bellator as we currently see in the UFC with Daniel Cormier, the light heavyweight champion, currently holding the heavyweight title, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then we're going to have Ryan Bader, the Bellator light heavyweight champion, fighting for the heavyweight title. So if he wins, we potentially have the two biggest organizations in the world, each having a simultaneous belt holder in two divisions. And with that trade that we just talked about a minute ago, I personally would love to see what happens if Ryan Bader wins. Can we set up that fight between Ryan Bader and Daniel Cormier? That, to me, is insane and exciting.
But if you become, if you have two championships, that basically puts you on the hook of like having to defend two titles every year, doesn't it?
Yeah, to a certain extent, it does. We've seen it before. The only time we've seen it before is with Conor McGregor, and they actually stripped him of the featherweight title as soon as he won the lightweight title, because he had no plans on going back down. Daniel Cormier, on the other hand, has said that if he gets the opportunity, he would like to defend both belts. I think the plan is to strip him of his light heavyweight title on December 29th, which is the return of John Jones, and they're doing John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson for the light heavyweight title. So I think that Cormier will be stripped at that point of his light heavyweight title, because he won't be able to defend it before then. He does have, coming up this weekend, a defense of his heavyweight title. So I'm not really sure how Bellator would handle that, but the UFC, we have commonly seen them strip people of whichever title they think they are less likely to defend.
Interesting. And then, of course, before we get into our UFC 230 preview, we wanted to talk real quick about some lightweight fights that happened on UFC Fight Night last week.
Yeah, light heavyweight fight between Anthony Smith and Volkan Oezdemir, which was an exciting fight between two of the top prospects in the division. Two knockout artists in that division, for sure. Volkan is a guy who fought his way up through the ranks and made it to a title shot and lost to Daniel Cormier recently. And Anthony Smith is a guy who was a former middleweight, got dropped from the UFC, fought his way back in, and has now had a huge run at light heavyweight, recently putting out two former champions in Shogun Rua and Rashad Evans, and has just been on fire recently, and it's been very exciting, and he's a fun guy to watch. So they fought last weekend. Anthony Smith was able to pull out the victory with a rear naked choke, which is not what I expected, considering it's two knockout artists. You don't expect a submission, but I think it was a good measurement of where Anthony Smith really stands in the division. He's asking for a title shot now and saying some things like John Jones is less dangerous than Oezdemir and things like that. I think he's getting a little too big for his britches there, personally. John Jones has a tendency to make everyone not named Alexander Gustafsson or Daniel Cormier very silly, but good on him. And, when you beat the number 2 guy in the world, there's not much argument against you getting a title shot. So who am I to say no?
So going into our UFC 230 pay-per-view, and this is happening Saturday, November 3rd of 2018 in New York. So we just want to talk about a couple of the main card fights and, of course, the main event. So first we have Derek Brunson versus Israel Adesanya. Adesanya is undefeated as of right now, but he is also the lower-ranked fighter here. How do you see this one playing out?
So this, to me, is a really exciting match between two different striking styles. Derek Brunson is kind of an emotional guy. He likes to put a lot of pressure, throw a lot of big shots. And Adesanya is a very high-level kickboxer. So he has a very varied striking game that he likes to stand at range and throw a lot of kind of unorthodox techniques. So I think it's going to be a really fun matchup between a high-pressure guy with a lot of power and a really, really good counter striker, which is always fun, because you think that the high pressure guy is going to play into the counter striker's game, but you never really know if that guy, which Derek Brunson has a good reach, so if he can manage to land some of those strikes from the outside and manage to handle the footwork and the angles of Adesanya, it could be a real interesting match. Indeed.
So our next one we want to talk about is David Branch against Gerald Cannonier, and this is a middleweight fight.
Yeah, so this is Jared Cannonier or Cannonier, I'm not sure which one, but I do like his nickname, the Killer Gorilla, which is just absurd and kind of terrifying. It's his debut at middleweight, having fought at light heavyweight previous to this. And so I'm really interested to see how he handles the new weight class. He's not an overly large light heavyweight. He's on the smaller end of the scale. So really, he's one of those guys who is kind of would be known as what we call a tweener. I think personally, he would probably fare best at like a 195 weight class as opposed to 185 or 205. But nonetheless, David Branch has also fought at light heavyweight in another organization, so they're both kind of bigger middleweights. So it's going to be an interesting fight. David Branch is a very exciting guy. He's towards the top of the division. His last fight was against Luke Rockhold, I believe, and he had Luke Rockhold hurt. And Luke Rockhold's a guy that many people think is the best middleweight in the world. He trains with Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, Khabib Nurmagomedov at AKA, American Kickboxing Academy under Javier Mendez. And David Branch had him in trouble. David Branch clipped him, and a lot of people thought that he was going to put him away. And David Branch is a high-level ground fighter as well. He's a black belt under Renzo Gracie, which, as Chael Sonnen said, not all black belts are created equal. And a Renzo Gracie black belt is one of the best you can get. And so he's a very high-level guy. I think it's a very, very tall order for Jared Cannonier. Coming into this fight on short notice. Originally, David Branch was supposed to fight Jacare Souza, who is now in the co-main event, after Luke Rockhold had to pull out of his rematch with Chris Weidman. So it's an interesting fight. I think David Branch is going to pull it out, and then I'd be real interested to see where he goes from here. I think he'll get one or two, one of the top-tier guys next and be on his way to a title shot if he can keep winning.
Okay, well, it sounds like we know who Pat thinks is going to win that fight.
Yeah.
So the next one last one we're going to talk about before we get to the main event, we got Chris Weidman and Ronaldo Souza. One guy from the United States, one from Brazil. Looks like an interesting matchup. What can you tell us?
So these two fighters, Chris Weidman is a former champion, lost to Luke Rockhold, and since then he kind of had a rough go of it. He lost, I think, 3 fights in a row. Then he came back and beat Kelvin Gastelum in very impressive fashion, and then had to sit out with an injury for a little while. Jacare Souza, on the other hand, is another one of those guys in the same class as Chris Weidman. He's kind of perennially at the top of the division. He kind of will lose one fight in either a title shot or a number one contender fight, and then win one in an incredibly impressive fashion, and then be right back in that conversation again. He is by far one of the highest level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners in the UFC today. He's up there with your Damian Maias, and it's a real interesting fight because Chris Weidman in some of his fights has looked completely unstoppable. I mean, his title run, he's the one who took out Anderson Silva. That alone says about as much as you can say about a fighter. He took out who a lot of people think is the greatest fighter of all time. Then he went on to beat Lyoto Machida afterwards, and just his resume is about as good as they can get. And Jacare is just a dangerous guy in every facet of the game. He has a lot of power, and his ground game is almost unparalleled. So it's a real interesting fight. I want to say that Chris Weidman is going to win. Jacare is a little older. He's been dealing with some injuries, some illnesses. I think that Weidman's game, if he's smart, is going to be enough to stop Jacare's game. I'm not sure if Weidman will get a finish. I think it might go to a decision, maybe, for Weidman. But I'm not very confident in that.
Okay, and then finally, the moment you've all been waiting for. Now, this main event was a long time coming here. We got Daniel Cormier against Derek Lewis.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's fair to say coming into this, Derek Lewis would be considered the underdog. But every dog has his day. So,
yeah.
What do you think? What do you think he's got to do in order to try to win this fight?
Land that punch. That's all he has to do. Derek Lewis is kind of in this fight is kind of the epitome of the puncher's chance, which sounds terrible to say. Yes, I get it. He's coming into this fight on not a ton of lead up time. He fought a month ago, where he was on the verge of losing a bout and landed his big right hand on Alexander Volkov in the last 11 seconds of the fight and put him out cold after a couple strikes on the ground. And to me, this is, Daniel Cormier is one of the greatest of all time. He's in that conversation for sure. He's one of only 2 people in UFC history to hold a title in 2 different weight classes at the same time. He is also undefeated at heavyweight. The only person Daniel Cormier has lost to is John Jones, twice, unfortunately. But at least one of those times, I think maybe both of those times, he tested hot for performance-enhancing drugs. So, I mean, I don't know how to take that. It's a question of whether would he have lost, would he have not, doesn't matter. He's phenomenal. So to me, this is one of the greatest technicians and one of the greatest wrestlers we've ever seen in MMA versus the epitome of just raw strength and power. So Derek Lewis he at any point in the fight, if he lands that right hand on your head, you are done. Just no question about it. Whether he lands it in a little short shot and a scramble, we've seen him put out guys where they were just transitioning on the ground and he landed 2 small punches on a guy and put him out cold on the ground. We've seen him land that one shot on somebody's chin. We saw him land a glancing blow off the top of Travis Brown's head. And then Travis Brown was on chicken legs, just completely done. And so there's no point in this fight where you can feel comfortable and safe standing anywhere that Derek Lewis can reach you. That being said, Daniel Cormier is better everywhere. To me, this is a question of whether Daniel Cormier's technique and wrestling and game plan can outdo the brute force and size of Derek Lewis.
But if you're a Daniel Cormier, is your game plan coming into this more to just go high pressure and just overwhelm your opponent, or are you playing more defensive and just making sure you don't take that shot? Or you maybe mix it up?
I think it's a little both. I think he uses the pressure as his defense. If he can stay inside of that range and hopefully keep it. We've seen Daniel Cormier use against a bigger guy like Frank Mir, put him up against the fence and just high pressure, just dirty boxing and not letting him breathe at all as a defense against that big right hand or against the rangy striking or the takedown. And if he could do that to Derek Lewis and tire him out, Derek Lewis is not known for having the best gas tank. He's not known for having the best cardio. And so I think that if Cormier can use those tools to just keep a lot of pressure on Derek Lewis and not let him get comfortable enough to land that hand, then I think that he can win it. I think he can win it anywhere, personally. I think that one of the things that might be a factor is Cormier is coming off of a hand injury, which I know is not healed 100%. So I think that Cormier would be a little more likely to try to strike a little more were it not for that injury. So I think that could play into at least into his game plan. He might be more apt to go for the takedown and go for the wrestling rather than try to do a lot of what he really likes to do, which is dirty boxing. He really likes to get in on the inside, get people uncomfortable, and throw a lot of really short inside punches. We see him particularly in Jones and Gustafsson fight. He likes to grab people by the back of the head and throw and pull their head down into his uppercut, which is a real hard move to defend against. It really hurts because it's not only is it a heavyweight fighter pulling down on your neck, which just hurts, and your natural reaction is going to be to pull back up, but then he's landing that uppercut at the same time. So it's messing with you in a couple different ways. You're trying to avoid the takedown, and then he's hitting you with a hard shot at the same time. So I think that right hand injury might stop him from doing some of that, and that's actually how we saw him knock out Stipe, which is a real short right hook inside of the clinch. So he might avoid that, but it could honestly play a little better into his hand as far as taking damage goes. If he's more looking to wrestle, then he might avoid that shot better, in a sense.
I think one of the things we can analyze with these fights in general is, what's going to happen if the majority of the fight is standing up versus on the ground. So for Cormier, do you think he's better off getting Lewis on the ground? Do you think Lewis can really land that punch if he's being, held on the ground? Do you think that's the way to go?
I think so. I think that I think that Cormier has better stand-up. He's a better boxer. He's more technical, and he does have power, but his power doesn't come from the same place that Derek Lewis's power does. Derek Lewis is just that raw, anything he throws is death type of power. Daniel Cormier has to use more technique, where he uses body weight behind him. He uses a lot of footwork. But yes, I think that Daniel Cormier is much safer using a wrestling strategy. I think that will be a lot of it. I think that he has a very tenacious takedown game. He is very good at tiring people out, very good at making them carry his weight. And even for a guy as big as Derek Lewis, with how good Daniel Cormier is at making you support him and holding you down in positions that are going to make you uncomfortable, I think that is where Daniel Cormier is going to shine in this fight, and I think that is where he will be able to get the finish. And if I had to guess, I would say it's second or third round submission for Cormier.
Okay, well, there you have it, folks. That's our UFC 230 preview. And, of course, we're going to have more of these mixed martial arts videos coming, so make sure to like and subscribe and keep on watching this. You're an asshole, dude.
I'm joking, you. You're an asshole, Alex.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
With your fucking pumpkin shirt and shit.
I love this pumpkin shirt.
Yeah, I bet you do.